member for Courtney-Alberni.
Madam Speaker, question to the Minister. With COVID-19 and the support for the fishers, can the Minister clarify how many fishers and fish harvesters applied for the Fish Harvesters Benefit and Fish Harvesters Grant? And is she willing to extend the application process for those fishers, further extend, that couldn't apply because they're out on the water fishing?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for the question. Madam Chair, the Fish Harvesters Benefit and Grant Program was one of the only industry-specific programs that was made available. We recognized how challenging it was for fish harvesters because of the way their enterprises were set up, that they were unable to qualify for a number of the other government programs that were there. That's why we developed this program. This was a almost close to a $500 million program to make sure that harvesters could get through this very difficult.
The Honourable Member for Courtney-Alberni. I'm sorry, you have to repeat the question.
Will the Minister extend the program, the application program?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The program was extended a number of times to make sure that we caught as many people as we could during the height of the pandemic and making sure that the people were able to apply.
The Honourable Member for Courtney-Alberni.
Will the Minister commit to increasing the transparency of a quota license ownership by creating a public online database of license holdings in BC?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank you, my colleague, for that question. With regards to the Fisheries Committee, who actually had done the study on the West Coast fishery, we're making sure that we're working British Columbia to identify the priority fisheries management and licensing concerns. This is ongoing work. We're doing it.
Member for Courtney-Alberni.
In that same report, Madam Speaker, it was identified that fish in Canadian waters are a resource for Canadians, that no future sales of fishing quota licenses to non-Canadians should happen. Can the Minister outline what steps she's taking to stop foreign ownership of the quota in BC?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are continuing to work on West Coast licensing review through Fisheries and Oceans Canada. We've contracted a comparative analysis of Atlantic and Pacific commercial fishing policies and regulations and are initiating a review of the existing foreign ownership. Madam Chair, there's a lot of work to be done here, but that work is ongoing and we are committed to making sure that we address these concerns.
Member for Courtney-Alberni.
Madam Speaker, we have a wild salmon crisis going on in British Columbia. In fact, we saw the lowest return of the Fraser River sockeye, which is the largest salmon-bearing river in the world, in this year, with less than 300,000 returning sockeye and a run that normally had 4 million. This is following last year, which was the lowest return in recorded history. Now, the Minister's talked about her commitment to it, but does she actually believe that her current commitment of funds and resources is enough to deal with this issue?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The protection of wild Pacific salmon is a priority for this government. We sympathize with communities who have been impacted by the salmon harvesting. We know that there's a lot to do. We have been investing in habitat restoration. We've invested in Big Bar. We're making sure that we're working with community groups, with Indigenous communities, with the BC government to do everything we possibly can to protect the wild Pacific salmon. But Madam Chair, it's not just enough to protect them. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to grow those fish as well. We want to see this come back to an abundance. We're going to continue to do that.
Honourable Member for Courtney-Alberni.
Sorry, Canada spends a fraction of what our neighbours in the United States spend on wild salmon management and recovery. We have a collective responsibility to invest in salmon now. So that the species can be recovered before it's too late, Madam Speaker? And can the Minister commit to significant new and ongoing investments in the recovery of wild salmon populations and management for future generations?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I agree with my colleague across the way. We need to do everything possible in order to address the crisis that wild Pacific salmon are in right now. That is why we have made significant investments through the BC Shrift program, why we have pulled out all the stops when it comes to Big Bar, why we will continue to work with Indigenous communities, with the BC government, with stakeholders, with industry to find the best path forward. Madam Chair, there is no one easy solution to this. We're working to make sure that we are hearing from everybody and doing everything we can to protect the fish.
Member for Courtney-Alberni.
Simple question. Will she provide further and new resources to deal with this wild salmon emergency?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. We are continuing to work with our partners to make sure that we're addressing the concern of wild Pacific salmon. We know there's a lot to be done. We will continue that work, Madam Chair. We will not rest until we make sure that the Pacific salmon grow and come back to where they should be.
Member for Courtney Alberni.
Will the minister commit to a coordinated and cooperative wild salmon recovery plan, something which DFO has not clearly been successful doing so far?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, wild Pacific salmon are a priority for our government. We are working diligently on a number of different measures to address the steep declines in the in the Pacific salmon populations. That includes everything from habitat restoration to working with Indigenous communities to commercial harvesters to recreational fishers. We're not stopping, Madam Speaker. We're going to continue to work to make sure that we address this ongoing concern.
Member for Courtney Alberni.
Well, I'll tell you how it's working in terms of significant investments. The Salmon Enhancement Program is a lifeline for hatcheries and habitat restoration, but has not seen any funding increase in over a decade. In fact, the Tofino hatchery, where I live, they're getting $8,000 a year. They'll work on a river, bring it back, and then they'll go to another river and bring it back, and they'll have to go back to the other river because it's crashed. They're not getting the support they need. Will the minister commit to significant and a permanent increase to the Salmon Enhancement Program? If not, why?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the member opposite and I are actually on the same page. We know that there's a lot that needs to be done when it comes to restoring wild Pacific salmon. We are working with communities. We work with the province, with Indigenous people on a coordinated plan. That's what we're doing. We have made significant investments in the BC Shrift program. We support the Salmon Enhancement Program. We're working with stakeholder groups to find out what the best path forward is. Those are all initiatives that we've undertaken as a government. We're committed to
the Honourable Member for Courtney Alberni.
Clearly not on the same page, Madam Speaker, because not enough money is flowing. I just keep reminding the minister about the Salmon Enhancement Program, the lack of investments in restoration and enhancement. Right now, we need $500 million just to save the Fraser, never mind the rest of the coast in the next 5 years. We can't get an answer. Will she commit more money, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Chair, we will continue to work with our partners to make sure we have a coordinated approach to the restoration of the wild Pacific salmon. This is extremely important to us as a government. We're continuing the important work that's at Big Bar to restore the natural fish passage there. We continue to work with First Nations, with industry, with stakeholders to support the recovery of wild salmon. Madam Chair, there is no one easy solution to this. We are taking a
Honourable Member for Courtney Alberni.
Sources are inadequate. So, Madam Speaker, in respect to the Discovery Island fish farms, which we know was identified in Cohen number 19, that they were supposed to be moved by the end of September this fall if they weren't meeting, if they were threatening, obviously, juvenile migrating wild salmon, which is happening. My question to her is, were the current farm-level diagnosis for disease and pathogens used in her current determination of less than minimal harm to wild sockeye stocks?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, our government is committed to an area-based management approach to aquaculture, and these particular farms may not be the best fit for the location or for the adjacency to the First Nations communities. That's why we're finalizing formal consultations with the local communities and each First Nation on the Discovery Islands to whether or not those licenses will be renewed. I will say, Madam Chair, that the First Nations communities there recognize how important it was, but also told us—
The Honourable Member for Courtney Alberni.
Is it reasonable to assume that the DFO document, a fishery decision-making framework incorporating the precautionary approach, is the default policy when it comes to decision-making related to fish farms?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regards to, I would like to finish my comments on the Discovery Islands, because one of the things that I thought was very important was we heard directly from First Nations communities that we could not make a unilateral decisions without consulting with them before we made decisions on the Discovery Island fish farms. That's one of the reasons we're having those conversations now. I have met with First Nations chiefs directly myself on this issue. Madam Chair, we know that that we're taking an area-based management approach to aquaculture. We're going to continue to do the hard work that needs to be done.
Honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
You mean she's not using that document? Is the government on track to keep its election promise to remove open net fish farms from coastal BC by 2025?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our government's committed to developing and delivering on concrete solutions to transition open net farms. Recently, we announced the Parliamentary Secretary for the member for Burnaby North Seymour as the lead on engagements on this important initiative. This is a change that requires close relationships and collaboration with the province of British Columbia, with Indigenous people, with communities, with industries and other stakeholders to ensure that the transition is workable. Madam Chair, we're committed to this and we're going to continue to work on it to make sure that we get it done.
The Honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Madam Speaker, Department of Fisheries and Oceans negotiators are proposing a new approach for First Nations to increase their food, social and ceremonial access. The proposed approach goes by the name single allocation and require First Nations to purchase fishing access to increase their FSC access. First Nations can either use government funding provided for this purpose or their own revenue. Can the Minister explain to First Nations why this single allocation mandate was developed without any consultation with First Nations in British Columbia?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, First Nations have a right to food, social, and ceremonial fish. We recognize that. We're going to make sure that they have the right to take, and we take this as a priority, Madam Chair. But conservation has to take the top priority over everything. Through the Aboriginal Fishing Strategy, DFO and First Nations negotiate mutually acceptable FSC fisheries agreements. These agreements contain provisions related to amounts that may be fished for FSC purposes, species, gear, area, and other factors.
Honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When we hear about the government and their relationship with First Nations, and we see how they failed to honor Section 35 rights. We've heard from witnesses that a large part of the issue is that the DFO doesn't have the mandate to negotiate on a nation-to-nation basis, that responsibility falls to the government and the Minister of Indigenous and Crown Relations, and that she should be leading this discussion. What actions can she say to ensure that true nation-to-nation discussion, and not one based on existing regulations and colonial procedures, is happening?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I will say when it comes to reconciliation, our government takes a whole-of-government approach. I work directly with the Minister of Crown and Indigenous Relations on these agreements that we have with First Nations, particularly right now in Atlantic Canada with what we're dealing with the moderate livelihood fishery. It's extremely important that we have those negotiations and we have those conversations with the Minister as well as with myself. We're going to continue to make sure that we address the concerns we hear. We're going to continue to work on the path of reconciliation. Madam Chair, it is not an easy thing to do, but we were committed to making sure that we get there.
Member for Courtenay Alberni.
European green crab in BC are having a significant threat to wild Pacific salmon. The Minister and DFO failed to live up to their direction of the Auditor General in controlling the spread of green crab. Will the Minister be providing adequate funding to coastal First Nations who have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of their own funds to develop a comprehensive plan to mitigate the impact of the European green crab?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, actually, in my mandate letter, it addresses aquatic invasive species. The European green crab can have significant impacts on marine ecosystems and can harm shellfish and aquaculture industries. DFO is collaborating with our partners, including First Nations, provincial governments, stakeholders, and the U.S. state and federal governments to address the threats of this species and Canada's fisheries and ecosystems. Madam Chair, we know that there's a lot of work to be done when it comes to aquatic invasive species, and we're committed to doing that work.
Very short question from the member from Courtenay Alberni.
A significant and comprehensive recovery effort should be in place for the species affected by the Big Bar slide. Returns have been near zero, and it seems that DFO isn't treating this issue like the severe emergency that it is. When will the department be initiating a comprehensive salmon populations affected by the Big Bar?
Honourable Minister, 15 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm very proud of the work that we've done at Big Bar. That has been a tri-government approach. We've implemented a number of measures to make sure that salmon are able to traverse the river. We are currently in the process of creating a natural fish pathway. These are all things that have to be done because we know how important that the salmon are in the Fraser River.
The Honourable Parliamentary